It is 8 a.m. Tuesday, the 10th of March in Port Vila, Vanuatu, and interests in this area are closely monitoring Tropical Cyclone 17P, also known as Cyclone Pam, which is currently situated just to the east and east-northeast of the Solomon Islands. And as you can see based on the warning number 2 forecast track issued by the United States Joint Typhoon Warning Center, there is certainly enough reason to keep an eye on this storm. Now luckily, if it were to take this track, it would move directly between Fiji and Vanuatu. That would be good news because the inner core where the strongest winds are located would stay offshore. Nevertheless, even if this track were to verify, you would still likely see at least some gale force winds along some of these smaller islands. But also look at the margin of error. You can see that the storm could track as far east as directly over Fiji and as far west as some of the smaller islands of central and southern Vanuatu. And I must say that based on the morning update from the forecast models, if anything, they do seem to be trending a little closer to Vanuatu than would otherwise be indicated by this forecast track, and we will take a close look at that in just a moment. Before moving on from this graphic, however, please take note of the forecast intensity. As you can see right now, Tropical Cyclone 17P or Pam currently has maximum sustained 1-minute winds of 45 knots, but we are expecting significant intensification over the next few days. As a matter of fact, as we go into Friday night and Saturday morning Vanuatu time, the forecast 1-minute maximum sustained winds are expected to be as high as 120 knots, which is between 130 and 140 miles per hour. And again, this is in sustained 1-minute winds. So if you were to compare this to a hurricane out in the Atlantic or a Northwest Pacific typhoon, this would be the equivalent of a high-end Category 4. So you're looking at a very severe cyclone if this forecast intensity were to verify. As we turn to the latest forecast from the Fiji Meteorological Service, which is the official tropical cyclone forecast agency for this area, you can see that their forecast is relatively similar. By late Thursday evening local time, the storm is forecast to make it up to about a Category 3, and you can still kind of make out that they expect the track to be somewhere between Fiji and Vanuatu. But once again, I feel as though that the western part of this area will eventually be at least within the margin of error, and trends in the overall track of the cyclone on satellite imagery, along with those forecast model updates, which come out roughly every 6 to 12 hours, are going to have to be monitored very closely. This is the latest run of the American GFS forecast model, which has just been updated within the last few hours, and you can see based on the initial look, you can clearly make out where the tropical cyclone is located as of right now. It is situated just to the east-northeast of the Solomon Islands. Luckily, interests in this area don't have to worry about this storm nearly as much, as there really won't be much in the way of a steering mechanism that would force it back towards the west. But over the next 24 to 48 hours, we're expecting a very slow and subtle motion toward the south or south-southeast as the cyclone continues to gather steam. And as we go into the latter half of the week, this is when things really become tricky for Vanuatu. It looks as though the central and northern part of the island chain may be able to escape with nothing more than some very strong gale force winds, still more than enough to gather all those loose belongings that you may have around your home or the area that you live in, and just put those away so that they don't start blowing around. There's still a very good possibility of some very heavy rain and squally conditions, especially as we go on into Wednesday and Thursday. Now, in terms of any significant impacts, again, it looks as though that it could be more so the central and southern part of the Vanuatu island chain that could see the more intense winds associated with the inner core of the storm. You can see the GFS takes the center of circulation near or just barely to the east of some of these islands, including Port Vila here. And as we take a closer look, this is valid for 12 o'clock noon on Friday, and you can see Port Vila being impacted by 1-minute sustained winds in excess of 50 knots out of the south, and that is due to the clockwise motion of the winds around the cyclone, which is a very common signature south of the equator, of course. So this is going to be a very close call for Port Vila, even if the track were to verify in this model with the eye or the center of circulation passing just offshore. If you're anywhere near that western eye wall of a severe cyclone, you could still be talking about easily severe and damaging winds. Additionally, if this run were to verify, it looks as though Erromango could even be at a higher risk of receiving damaging winds near or just out of the western eye wall. You can see that it looks as though the eye of the storm could make its closest approach to Vanuatu out across Erromango and also Tana just to the south. So all three islands here need to be on very close guard. You need to be preparing now in the event that this run were to verify, or even worse, if the models were to continue to trend farther towards the west. Also, just for comparison purposes, this is the most recently updated run of the European ECMWF, and you can see that the model, much like the GFS, is taking the storm in a general south to south-southeast direction over the next few days. And as we take a closer look, again valid for noon on Friday, you can see that if anything, the European is ever so slightly more to the east and the north with the overall position of the center. And these are very small and subtle differences, but these little subtle differences can make all the difference again for these islands. And even with the more easterly track in the model compared to the GFS, you can see just how close that this western eye gets to some of these smaller islands. So now is the time to make those preps if things were to change in the official forecast track. It is also definitely worth pointing out that we have fairly good agreement between the GFS ensembles and the European ensembles. And for those that don't know what ensembles are, well, first and foremost, you need to know that these forecast models have to make a lot of assumptions about the current state of the atmosphere. We don't have enough observations worldwide to know exactly what those initial conditions are like from one grid point to another. So to balance out the uncertainty, the models have 21 different model members, say in the GFS for example, and each one of those model members are set with slightly different initial conditions to see if that will throw off the forecast significantly. And what you're looking at on this image is an average of the 21 member GFS model ensemble, and you can see that there is fairly good agreement with the operational run that we took a look at with the center of circulation just to the east of Port Vila by noon on Friday. And the same can be said about the 51-member European ECMWF model ensemble as we go on from Friday into Saturday. So if anything, once again, the main thing I'm trying to make here, the main point, is that it looks as though if it's going to trend either closer to Fiji or Vanuatu, it looks like central and southern Vanuatu are much more likely to be under the line of fire. Before closing out this video update, it would not be a good idea to really finish things off without at least looking at the initial state of the tropical storm. You can see based on the most recent microwave satellite pass taken within the last few hours that the inner core does appear to be intensifying and organizing as has been expected. You see more in the way of these banding features, but more importantly, as we get closer to the center of circulation, it looks as though things are consolidating quite nicely. As we go later on into the morning hours, we do have the luxury of using visible imagery, and you can see the visible now taking over for the standard infrared in the last one or two frames of this animation. And this is exactly what you're looking for if you're looking at a brand new tropical disturbance or now a tropical storm that is still going to be looking to intensify. You can see that the center of circulation is now clearly wrapping around the strongest convection, and if anything, it looks as though there could be some dry air intrusion to the southwest of the center, but you really don't see much in the way of dry air entrainment on the water vapor imagery. And it looks as though it's in a very favorable outflow environment. You can see the outflow both in the northern and southern semicircles of the storm fanning away from the center of circulation, and that is a sign that the vertical wind shear is very light, which is something that you need for the storm to be able to fan out and ventilate and get some of that latent heat release out of there. And as we turn to the enhanced infrared, once again, very cold cloud tops. The colder the cloud tops are, that's a sign that they're rising higher up in the atmosphere, which is a sign of very intense heavy rainfall, convection, and of course thunderstorms are needed for these tropical cyclones to continue to intensify. So all things are go based on the latest satellite trends. Upper level atmospheric conditions are already very favorable. We just saw the signs of that on satellite imagery, but it's also being confirmed by the wind shear analysis available from the University of Wisconsin. You can see it more clearly as we turn on the color representation. These dark navy blue and almost black colors denote areas of very light vertical wind shear, generally speaking 15 knots or less, and the forecast models are keeping a very favorable upper level ridge directly over the cyclone throughout the week, which is why they're showing rapid intensification. You can see some of the upper level divergence indicated in this area. These are very high values, again, which is very favorable, and as a result our low level vorticity is on the increase. Perhaps one thing that is even more troubling is the amount of oceanic heat content in the area, and this area contains some of the highest oceanic heat content that you would find even across the entire globe. So when you add in that the vertical wind shear is very favorable and you already have a developing tropical storm, this would be a sign that yes, we're going to more than likely have about at least one round of rapid intensification over the next 72 hours. And even though the oceanic heat content begins to drop off as you venture southward toward Vanuatu, these are still relatively high oceanic heat content values. So that sums up your Tropical Cyclone Pam update for this Tuesday morning, but we will have more video updates posted at 28storms.com/cyclone. You can also find frequent updates available at our Facebook and Twitter feeds, and you can see our Twitter feed on the right-hand side of our Cyclone page, and in the middle, that's where you're going to find our latest video update postings as well.